kind of a
All right, folks, welcome to Crew Call 2-12, December 2020. And there's going to be some firsts on this podcast today because, well, it's the first podcast with my friend Blaine Hadfield of Arrowhead Models. It is a podcast during which he's going to show something that's never been seen before. And it's the first video podcast. I should point out, I have no idea what I'm doing here, but you know what? If Joe Rogan can do it, we can do it. Right, Blaine?
That's right.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So Blaine, where is Blaine these days? Where is here for you?
Here, like physical location?
Yeah, where are you living these days?
Yeah, so we live in Wyoming.
Oh, in
Small
Wyoming.
town.
You were in Utah before, right?
Correct. Yep.
Why? You know, I visited Wyoming once, rail fanning, and God, it was beautiful out there. I mean, just really amazing looking. But I guess I was there, it was probably sometime in the early fall.
Okay.
And we were out around Hermosa, I want to say.
Uh-huh.
And I remember going into a gas station to get gas. And I said to the attendant, is it always this windy here? And he just looked at me like, windy? And then I realized, yeah, I guess it is. But it was so windy, I found myself standing behind rocks just to get out of the incessant wind. It was like drying out my eyeballs, and I'd never encountered that before.
There are corridors in Wyoming that are really quite windy. That's not where we're at.
I see. So it wasn't. I just assumed it was all that air coming off the Front Range.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about weather, so I don't know how it is generated and how it moves.
Yep.
But yeah, there are some corridors along the I-80 freeway that are perpetually windy.
I don't think we were far off of that.
You wouldn't have been, yeah.
Right.
You're in Hermosa.
Right.
Sheridan is some distance from there. We're, in terms of sort of your east-west, we're almost dead center of the state, but we're right up on the Wyoming-Montana border. So we're just a little bit, for all intents and purposes, a little bit east of Yellowstone.
It sounds like a place where you probably don't want to be intimidated by winter.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yeah.
Although we just had a major storm here yesterday, so, you know.
Yeah, and
winter.
I would never go so far as to say that, we have the worst winters, but we have pretty serious winters.
Yep. So Blaine, we've known each other a while. I think the first time we ever met in person was probably at the Naperville show, or whichever city it was, maybe in after Naperville. I can never remember the name of that city. What was the Naperville meet after Naperville? It was
Lyle? Possibly?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not sure, which show that was, but I know Scott and I drove out there in some marathon one-day driving session, and we ended up having dinner with you one of those nights, and that was back when you were with a different company. So maybe you can just kind of talk a little bit about how you got started as a model railroad manufacturer, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So I own and operate a company called Arrowhead Models. We launched our first products approximately 2 years ago at the National Train Show 2 years ago, so 2018.
And that was your hopper?
That was the committee design hopper, yes. Yep. But obviously it didn't begin there for me. For approximately 10 years prior, I was employed by a company called Exact Rail, which I'm sure your users are familiar with.
Everybody's heard of Exact Rail, yeah.
Had a friend join me. You'll have to forgive me for that.
That's quite all right. Adds to the authenticity of the whole thing.
It does, yeah. Yeah, so I led product development for Exact Rail for approximately a decade.
I just assumed you were a principal in Exact Rail, but is that not the case?
It's not the case.
Okay.
No, at present, Exactrail is owned by a gentleman named John Pastana. And he's either been a co-owner or full owner. He's full owner now for the entirety of that company's existence. But in approximately 2017, if I remember correctly, it became clear to me that it was just time to go a different direction. There were other things that I wanted to accomplish, and Arrowhead is the product of that.
So Arrowhead is totally your company?
100% owned by myself.
So it sounds like it's pretty all engaging. You're not bored.
Yeah. So we're a very small company. Things are trending in all the right directions, but as of present, it's just me. My wife contributes. She responds to emails and accompanies me to shows from time to time, and certainly does everything that she can to help me. She's absolutely fabulous. But in terms of product development and those domains of the business, and it's me and her. So
boy. So that's a daunting kind of task, particularly when you are doing the level of detail and some of the cutting edge things that you're doing on your models. But you know what? In a way, I think you could only do it to that degree when you have complete control over something like that, and through almost effort of will, you're making this happen.
Yeah. So you're exactly right. In fact, it's one of the aspects of our business that we consider to be our cachet, maybe even uniquely our cachet, insofar as every other model train manufacturer of which I am aware breaks product development up among different divisions of people, right? There's different divisions of labor.
Sure.
Different divisions of people are in charge of. And typically how that looks, speaking sort of in the broadest possible sense, is model train manufacturers will do the research, and then they will turn that research over most commonly to a Chinese organization that does the design,
the CAD tooling,
and so forth. And for us, and this will always be the case for our business, it's very important to our identity. We do everything we can not to separate those activities, because the research component is what directly informs the design component. You do research so that you can do design. And the more familiar and the more intense and articulate your research is, right, the more that pays through in the design. And one of the things that, like, to help, it's a very simple concept, right? But to convey the magnitude of what that means to the design process. I mean, imagine if I took a picture of an everyday object in your home, and your steering wheel of your car. You handle it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Sit down at the table, take a pencil, and draw that steering wheel.
Right.
Right. And you realize,
try to describe it to somebody else so that they can design it.
Yeah. And you realize in that moment that there's a plethora of decisions that you have to make that become really, really, really difficult. In a relative sense, the more divorced you are from that product.
Right. So in a way, you sort of disconnected all of these potential misunderstandings, because it's all happening in Blaine, right?
Right.
But the skill set that you have to do that is not typical, right? Because now you, as Mr. Arrowhead, you have to be a marketing guy, a promotional guy, a sales guy, a design guy, research guy, and you have to have incredible computer chops, right?
Right. Well,
Is that something
yeah,
you had, from your time doing other things, or something you had to develop for this?
um, well, I definitely got my start at ExactRail, but my contribution at ExactRail looked differently than it does at Arrowhead in some unsurprising ways, right? I entered ExactRail at a moment when the company was established. You're going to see my dog walk across here. Forgive me for that. This is my dog Willie, and I absolutely
Hey,
love him.
Lily.
A Willie, like Willie Nelson.
Willie, okay.
Willie. Yeah, so it it developed in some surprising ways in that um, my contribution was at a fairly high level at ExactRail. At no point there was I myself doing the design. So my entrance to Arrowhead sort of went a different direction. I carried the title of an executive's title at ExactRail, and we were building a team and an operation, at least from my end, that maybe had that guise, at least. I mean, we were a small company. I don't want to like sell my credentials, right? I mean, there are no big companies in model railroading, but
Right.
nonetheless, we were well funded. We were very aggressive, and so I was looking at implementing the kind of schema that would support a really aggressive and robust production schedule from a high level.
Sure.
When it came to design and those other facets, I was primary and responsible for those endeavors, but I was so at a higher level. I wasn't myself using CAD or any of that. I had to develop those skills after the fact, and brought those to Arrowhead. So, for example, the committee design hopper, which was our first release at Arrowhead, was the first car that I myself had ever designed.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And just, from start to finish, how long did it take? Years?
Yeah, it took. I mean, it's a lot of work. And things have even gotten a little bit slower now, insofar as shortly after launching the company, the manufacturer that we're using, and this might be an event that some of your listeners are familiar with, one of the primary manufacturers in the industry closed its doors. Well, when I say manufacturer, forgive me, there's an opportunity for ambiguity here. I mean a Chinese manufacturer.
Right.
And like many in the industry, we were upset by that.
So now, was that COVID related, or is this prior to that?
This was prior to that. So this was in late 2018.
Okay.
And
the one everybody knows about.
Yeah. And we were really fortunate. I had a good relationship, or at least I felt like I had a good relationship with the owner of that enterprise, and he did me a couple of real solids.
Really?
As a new manufacturer, you're particularly vulnerable to all sorts of different influences. You're particularly vulnerable, and the earlier you are in the cycle, I think it's probably fair to say that the more vulnerable you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Losing your manufacturer isn't like, that's a big deal. And just about a week before those stores were closed, he sent us all of our product, which was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And we were the only one to do this out of maybe 25 businesses. He sent us all of our tooling too. So we weren't burdened with the exercise of being new and being overwhelmed by everything that's happening, and then having to go out and chase our tooling and
Right. And of course, I'd heard stories that not everybody was so fortunate. So your tooling was all, when you say tooling, do you mean physical tooling or the electronic versions?
Well, the electronic versions all reside with us.
Okay.
So again, to parlay back to um, that point in our conversation, when we do the design, we're effectively writing the book, and we're just turning those files over to a partner of some kind
Who prints it?
to print it.
Gotcha.
And
So all of that tooling came with your product, literally physically shipped?
Yeah.
Wow.
And we saw that on the shipping list. And that was really unusual. Like, that's a scary thing because
did he do that without you asking for it?
Correct. Yeah.
Ah.
And when I followed up with him about it, he just said, "Don't worry, it's for your own good."
Had you already been physically over in China many times to kind of, yeah. So you've done the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But have you been able to, or have you had to do that for Arrowhead, or is it all remote now?
No, it's not all remote. I have done that far less than I would like. There's obviously COVID restrictions to travel.
Sure.
That's encumbered. That's encumbered a lot for the whole industry. I don't know how closely people are, what the litmus test is for most people, but things have slowed down. It's apparent. You see that in a lot of manufacturers. Things have slowed down. We've had some product delays. Everything is just running a little bit slower on that end.
Sure. We've seen it with everybody's supply chain.
Everybody. And a lot of that doesn't relate to the manufacturers themselves. It can be even further upstream, just getting steel to cut molds, plastic to run parts. I mean,
right.
Packaging, like all of those things upstream get affected, and it all just sort of, percolates down.
Right.
So things are a little slower. So for example, we have product that's coming to us, and our delivery time right now is, let's see, it left the factory on November 8th. We're still waiting for it.
So is it on the water, or is it stuck in the port, or do you know?
Yeah, it's stuck in logistics channels here in the US.
Right.
But, everything just slows down a little bit. So
this is the second round of something we haven't talked about yet, I take it?
Yeah, well, yeah, and we can talk about it here.
I wanted to finish up about the hopper, actually, because I wanted to know, among other things, how did you arrive at that particular choice as your initial model?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So believe it or not, it wasn't my first choice. My first choice was the ACF 4600 covered hopper. That was the car that I wanted to do. And then Athearn made an announcement for that car. And I didn't back away from it right away.
Mm-hmm.
But I recognized and, felt like there was no way around the massive distribution channel that Athearn has.
Oh, sure.
That a new company lacks. And I thought that I would get squashed on that. And that would, probably be the end of the effort. So we pivoted to the second car, which was the what we call the committee design hopper. Now, the ACF covered hopper is an important car for a lot of reasons. One of them is it had this massive production timeline. The prototype was produced from the mid 60s to the early 80s. Through that, you've got a lot of different phase variations. It was owned by almost everybody in one variation or another. Obviously, I'm speaking a little hyperbolically, but
very broad appeal to
very broad.
Yeah, wide range of modeling eras too. So
yeah, so as a new company, that's a really solid first choice.
Right.
The committee design hopper is almost the inverse of that. in that it has a much narrower paint scheme list, but in some respects, it's one of the most important post-World War II cars of any car type, I would argue. And one of the ways that you can make that argument is just by the numbers alone. The Pennsylvania Railway had over 16,000
Jeez. That's
committee
amazing.
design hoppers. There is no post-war car of any singular class with numbers of that magnitude.
Right.
So
right.
massive numbers. In fact, the Pennsylvania had so many committee design hoppers that by the time they went into service in Conrail, there were 15,076 on roster. And Conrail attempted to standardize its conveyances around 100-ton cars, right? Because by 76, a 100-ton car was more or less the standard.
Yep.
But they had so many committee design hoppers in particular that it was impossible for them to do that, and they stuck with the car.
Do you know offhand how long they lasted into Conrail?
Yeah, so they lasted into the 90s. Obviously, their numbers diminished year over year.
Right.
But in 1990, sorry, this is all impromptu, and I haven't looked at these numbers in a while.
It's all right.
At about 1990, yeah, there were still, if I recall, 5,000 cars on roster. And most car classes aren't themselves 5,000 cars deep, let alone ones that are 30 years old, right? I mean, the enormity of this car class is just difficult to really wrap your arms around in any significant way. So that was a very important car. In addition to the Pennsylvania paint schemes, the Rio Grande was an original buyer of the committee design car. And although the Rio Grande didn't have them in anything near the quantities that the Pennsylvania had, it really became like the car that characterized the fleet from there on. Once the Rio Grande acquired the committee car from Bethlehem, they really never looked back in terms of its design. So the committee design car is a 70-ton 3-bay hopper. And when the Rio Grande took the step towards 100-ton quads, that design is effectively a derivation of the committee design.
I see.
So
beefed up version of it.
Yep. Very similar features.
So you've had what, two runs of it now, or just the first one?
Of the committee design car? Just the first one.
Just the first one. Are there subsequent runs planned?
Yeah, there are. And so what we released in the first run of the committee design car are, so we did something with the committee design car that I think is special. We tooled two completely unique cars. So put an asterisk next to that, because that I'll expound on that here momentarily.
All right. I mean, they obviously had things in common a lot. Probably.
They obviously did, yeah. But in terms, if you're a model train manufacturer, you've got two costs, right? In every project. Obviously, there's more than this. I'm simplifying, but you've got the tooling cost, which is a significant portion at the outset, and you've got the piece cost.
Sure.
Right, after. The way unit costs, or the way the tooling costs, the way we count cars is what cars do we develop that have unique body tooling, okay, and not the various parts that go on it.
As opposed to detailing, right?
Right, because those 4-slide molds that generate that body tooling is where your cost resides.
I see. So if you can get two different cars out of the same basic tooling, you're way ahead.
You're way ahead. And if you can't, then you're paying for an additional car.
Sure.
And for us, we went the latter. So there are two body molds, two separate and completely distinct bodies for the Pennsylvania Pullman Standard version of the committee design car, which was, again, a Pullman built car. And there are, all of these cars were built to the same design parameters, but when you're building a lot as large as the Pennsylvania did, obviously there's no single car builder that can take on that magnitude of product outflow.
Right.
Pennsylvania went to all the major builders and then built a significant portion of those cars in their own shops as well, Altoona built cars. So you have the Altoona built cars, which roughly constitute about half of that production. And then you've got Pullman and American Car and Foundry and Bethlehem and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
We did the Pullman version for the Pennsylvania, and then we did the Bethlehem versions for the Rio Grande and the Southern, because the Southern Railway also owned them. And those two versions, the way, in very, very minor ways, those versions were different. And we wanted to capture the nuances of those differences.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no way to do that without creating distinct sets of body tooling. And so
Not and do it right.
Not and do it right. And it was one of those things where I doubt there's a customer out there. I mean, there are a few.
Yeah, we know probably
really
some of them personally.
Maybe, yeah, who really appreciate the differences between those two cars because they are very, very minute. We're working at a very sort of esoteric level.
Mm-hmm.
But it was important for us. So it's what we did. So there's, so in terms of our cost and then in some respects in terms of just our development, the committee design car is as distinct as a box car and a gondola. Like
Right.
they were, in order to understand those differences, it required a research effort that was equivalent for the Pullman car as what it would have been for an all new car.
I believe it.
And so we're very proud of that. And
because it was a Pennsy car, did that help you get the research you needed? Because there's so much of a volume of information from the Pennsy people.
No, actually, it didn't.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, there are great people in that society, and that is a very healthy, vibrant society that puts out a lot of literature and a lot of work. But to be completely honest, no, the Pennsylvania component of that project was probably more challenging than even the Rio Grande and Southern.
Were you able to get face-to-face and hands-on with one of these anywhere? Did any exist when you?
Yes. Okay. Yes. In fact, we don't develop cars unless we can do that.
Oh, okay. That explains it.
I wouldn't say that it will never happen. Obviously, there are some cars
need good documentation.
But we, as a rule, we seek builder's prints and then serious field time next to a car. So there is a car at the Danbury Railway Museum in Danbury, Connecticut. And I flew out to Danbury to research that.
Yep.
And spent a fair amount of time. I also went to a railway museum in the South to do field work on a Southern car. And then there was a Rio Grande car that was also nearby. And
I can tell you probably really enjoy that kind of research and documentation.
Otherwise, I do. Yeah. I mean, you would fail at a business like this if you didn't. But
exactly.
one of the reasons that's so important to us is because most of these cars were built at a time when plans were all drawn on vellum. And people who've worked in a manufacturing environment know that what happens in the office and what is practicable in a manufacturing space sometimes differ.
Right.
And so
we've seen a lot of examples of that, boy.
Yeah. So you get out on the floor, there's an inefficiency, or there's something that if you tweak this a little bit, you're going to open up efficiencies on the manufacturing floor. And so those changes are made, and it's not the case that the plans are updated.
Right.
Because you don't go back and you redraw plans because you change the plasma cut.
There's no need. You're already making it.
You're already making it. If you make adjustments to a press brake or something like that, right? Like you don't go back and, I mean, there's thousands of hours, I'm sure, in drawing all that,
right?
All those different plans up. So, it's a rule for us. You've got to get your hands on manufacturing prints, but you also have to go out and do the heavy lifting.
Right. So the gondola was a much less daunting task. I bet you didn't have to travel quite as far for that.
Oh, well, daunting can get quantified in a lot of different ways. What's unique about the gondola, and I have one here, I'll show it if I may, for people who are less familiar. How am I doing?
You're on full screen now.
Okay. So the gondola, what differentiates this from really any car that's ever come before is it's a composite model of brass and plastic. And
in other words, it's what we've been clamoring for eons.
I would like to think, yeah. I mean, it would be great if
did you want to point anything else out about the model itself while we've got you on the big screen?
Sure, yeah, I can do that. So what differentiate this model from others, in addition to its composite nature, is the quantity of its parts.
Why don't you make sure everyone understands what you mean by composite?
So,
you have an on deck handy?
No, I don't. It's got some dust on it. So the model is built with brass. There's more brass on this car than there is plastic.
So it looks like you've got a whole brass sheet that you're overlaying plastic to?
That's correct, yeah. And the reason that's significant is because in the manufacturing process, right, speaking specifically of model trains, you cut molds, which are cavities into which plastic is injected, and the plastic, of course, takes the shape, right? But plastic is viscous, and that cavity can only become so thin,
right,
before plastic will cease to flow.
Well, right. Plus you can dent brass to make it look like a lived-in kind of a model, yeah. And that's what's so attractive, from the modeling standpoint, I think.
Yeah, and there are some people out there doing some amazing things.
Right. Now, may I ask, and if it's proprietary, just tell me, but how are you bonding the plastic to the brass?
That is a little proprietary.
Okay.
You asked about how difficult the project was, and you thought, maybe with less travel there was less difficulty. What's been so challenging about the product is we've done something radically different. I mean, it is a radical departure from a manufacturing sense for all that word means. And
did they raise an eyebrow when you broached this
yeah.
methodology to them?
Yeah,
I'll bet.
Yeah, and we were supposed to receive the car in March, and there were just a lot of challenges because you asked about bonding, and that's really astute question because you're right. the kind of glues that one would use to bond metal are like on the opposite spectrum of what you're using when you're bonding high flow plastics,
Right.
like acetyl. And similarly, there's a similar problem with paint, right? The kinds of
Sure.
paint that you would use to adhere to a metal surface, again, are very, very different from what you would use from a plastic
Think
surface.
scale coat 1 versus scale coat 2.
Yes. Yeah. And so all of these things within this matrix, right, of parts that there are, it's just extremely challenging. And another problem is um, the the car doesn't have a body in a traditional sense, right?
Right.
Typically the way a model looks is you've got that, we talked about the foreslide, the body, and how when those are different cars from our
Sure.
point of view. Um, there is no body. There's a bunch of little parts that all go together.
What holds the corners together?
The corners of the top cord. So
Well, I mean, what holds the side to the end? Is it? It's not
pinned.
one solid
Metal.
piece of metal wrapped around the
No.
whole floor, is it?
No, it's metal pins. And I don't know if you can, this is going to be tough to do. Forgive me if I fail, but you can see maybe if I turn this, you can kind of see it grab the little light.
Oh yeah, no, I can see that.
So those cutouts are one of the unique features of the Greenville build of this car. And on the corners, again,
Yep, I can
you
see
can
that.
see that.
Yep.
So the corners, the side sheets and the end sheets of the car have these cutouts right where they would adjoin.
Sure.
And that would allow the car to flex a little bit without puckering those side and end sheets. And so they cut them down, and then the top cord, and there's like this, I can't find the right word right now, like a ventricle is the word that's in my mind. Forgive me for that. But yeah, there's like this cutout, right? And you can see through, and then the aperture. Thank you. The top cord, this side superior top cord and the in are themselves actually pinned together. And by pinning them as they have,
we're talking about prototype or model?
The prototype and the
model.
Oh, we duplicated the manufacturing technique in the model that they used on the freight car. And there are little tiny wire pins that get pushed in through the plastic. And the way we did the injection molding, those two sides pinned together and just like the prototype.
And this is all basically hand assembled there.
Yeah. And so when you look at the top cords, there's just it's not one piece, right? Just like the prototype.
Wow.
And
I can't wait to see one of these in person. It kind of snuck up on me and I missed it on the first go around. And that's what caused me to contact you, because I thought I'm supposed to be on top of this stuff. How did this escape my attention?
Well, I will get you some. We have some coming. Like I said, they're making their way to us, and we'll make sure
they ever get out of logistics, right?
Right. Yeah.
Hey, especially at this time of year, I've got things that I've sent that should have taken a day or two that are taking over a week with no end in sight. So I think the whole supply chain is a little bogged down right now. Hopefully it clears up in January. Let's just put it that way.
So we live in a small town. For Wyoming, Sheridan is not a small town, but for anyone else, Sheridan,
what's the population roughly?
About 17,000.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's half the size of my small town.
Okay. And then because Sheridan is the biggest thing going, you have to go effectively 100 plus 150 miles in any direction before you get to another town of equivalent size. So
Are you anywhere near Cody? I have a sound install customer in Cody that keeps shipping me things, and I keep shipping back to him, and we've had some shipping adventures.
Oh yeah. We haven't had any shipping adventures, but Cody is about 100 miles to our our west.
Okay.
So Sheridan is right at the base of the Bighorn Mountains. And effectively, you go over the Bighorn Mountains and then across the valley, and you're in Cody to the other side.
Nice. So the gondola, I think, was what got a lot of people's attention. But rumor has it that you've got some other things that are imminent. Anything you can talk about, or even
Yeah. So
show
this
us
is pretty
maybe?
exciting. Pretty excited about this. So I mentioned at the outset of the podcast that the first car was going to be the ACF 4600. Well, we have announced that we're picking that project back up again, and that will be our third all-new car from Arrowhead Models. And no one has ever seen these before, so this is a first. But we have tooling samples of the all-new ACF 4600.
Gorgeous.
Now,
Back off just a little, and I think, yeah, okay, we're getting a little better focus that way. Yeah, wow. You know, it hits me like a rail yard models kit. You know what I mean? With all of the fine brass work combined with the plastic. It's yeah, that's impressive.
all of the brass,
Ah.
inner bay stiffeners, the bay faces there are cut in brass because on an ACF 46, on a Pullman standard covered hopper, the bays as they come down to the gate are press broke and welded down a seam.
Sure.
But for ACF, they're only press broke on a small margin, and then there's another plate that's affixed to the side and welded. And that plate has overlap. So the inner part of the bay comes down like this, and on a Pullman standard car, it wraps really clean, but on an ACF car, there's a plate that overlaps like that.
Did you feel that because of the overlap, it would have been hard to tool it like that, whereas with the brass, you can just simply apply it to it?
Right. It would have been impossible to tool it accurately. By using brass as we have, it's got a very fine relief, and it is 100% prototypic. And then, of course, all of the fine details and everything that you see there. So
what's the MSRP on this car? Do you have one yet?
To be determined. Yeah.
Because I would think the labor component on that would be high.
Well, to put this into perspective, the Railgun was absolutely groundbreaking with 199 parts. Now, again, put this in perspective. Rapido, which does an absolutely wonderful job on their passenger cars, announced that with their finer diner, it had 172 parts per car, if memory serves.
And how many did you say on the gondola?
199.
On a gondola, jeez.
And one of the things that we take a lot of pride in is cost gets assessed in a lot of different ways. But I think if you're trying to distill down cost into a single metric, part count best summarizes cost because
it's directly related to labor.
It's directly related to labor in all sorts, right? So it's more engineering time. You have to cut more molds, right? Because there's more parts, there's more cavities. You've got greater breakage rates. If you're scrapping a car in the manufacturing process, like one every 100 parts, right? If you have a gondola with 30 parts, you're scrapping one of every 3 cars. If you have a gondola with 199 parts, you don't finish the whole car.
I never even thought about that aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
So does the covered hopper have a couple more parts to it?
Couple.
Do you have a count by off the top of your head?
Well, it depends on the phase variation, but 240.
So that's groundbreaking.
Absolutely groundbreaking. To put that into perspective, most of your high-end gondolas, right? Companies at the highest level of the game, 30 to 40 parts, right? And so for us to put together a car of this complexity that's this groundbreaking, and to do it at $54.95 for me is something we take a lot of pride in. We feel really good about that.
Yep. Yep. Well, you know, that doesn't strike me as an outrageous price for that car, particularly when it's what it is, but also when you compare it to other offerings that aren't that different in price from it. It's like no comparison, really.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know how
Yeah.
you do it, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to make those comparisons, the consumer is going to want to compare a gondola to a gondola, right? But a
Right.
manufacturer just sees the whole equation differently. The manufacturer is like, look, product complexity, part count is what I'm comparing it to. So I'm comparing the gondola to a passenger car that's $120. Similar part count.
Right.
You know,
And,
so
and anybody with eyeballs is going to tell the difference between that gondola and, you know, the old MDC.
I would hope so. I would hope so. So, and you know, the MDC car is still available if you know, if you're a modeler that has a different preference for how you want to be engaged in the hobby, still a great option. And Walthers did a mainline version of the car, which is sort of striking at the same sort of price point,
Right.
level of engagement. It's a great option. So, you know,
probably don't want to drop yours on the floor, so it's probably not ideal for 6-year-olds. I don't think that's the demographic we're aiming at here.
Yeah, yeah. So
yeah,
but go on.
So how far ahead are you thinking? You know, like how many projects do you have conceptually?
I
mean, you figure about a year per project, right? At least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm probably working about 5 years ahead of our
really
right now.
And are you able, well, obviously, I guess you're able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So, you know, you're not just focused on one car at a time.
Yeah. To say I'm working 5 years ahead probably deserves some explanation.
Okay.
Because it's not the case that we've just got 5 years of cars tooled up and ready to go, right? I mean, if a person, you know, that's not what's happening. But what is happening is we have a number of cars that are finished in design and in tooling now beyond the ACF 4600 that are being tooled as we speak. We have a number of cars that are finished in the design phase and are waiting to start tooling.
Okay.
And then you also have a couple of cars that are in some design phase of development present. And then in order, you know, the process doesn't begin with design. There's a preliminary phase of research where you have to do a sufficient amount of research to understand whether the project is commercially viable or not. And then there's a much more advanced stage of research where you're trying to inform the design effort. And if you sum all of that together, the kinds of projects that we're looking at now in that initial phase of research, right, which is real work. Like there's real work behind that. You can't, to execute at this level, you have to have a lot of information to feed that.
Exactly.
A lot.
Right.
And so to go out and to get that and to make that happen is itself a lot of work. And if that's where our look ahead begins, then we're about 5 years out.
Interesting. Let me ask you something. Do you consider yourself a model railroader in the sense that you have a layout or you want to have a layout or you've built a layout in the past? I really don't know that about you.
Yeah, that's a really great question. You and I are like in sync in some weird way because that's something I've thought about. For a long time, I've had a theory that a person is either fundamentally a model railroader, like if you were to draw like some sort of Venn diagram,
Right.
right? All these interests, and they all sort of come together with railroading. But my experience is that people fundamentally are like railroad enthusiasts of the prototype, right? And maybe they engage in model railroading,
Right.
or they're model railroaders fundamentally. 20 years ago, I would have definitely been the former. I do have modeling interests, so I have
But I
an
have zero time.
right. So I will put this in quotation marks. I model the Union Pacific from 1972 to 1984.
It's a big range.
Big range. There's a reason for that range, but I model that in a very obscure area of Nevada called Meadow Valley Wash.
Unfamiliar with it.
It is, yeah. And
Why that spot?
well, there's a lot of reasons. One, it's exceedingly remote, desolate, very intimidating, very daunting railroading country.
What was the driving force behind it being there? Is it, a mining kind of a thing or something else?
Oh, it's the UP main line. So the Union Pacific ran out across Wyoming, out of Cheyenne, Omaha,
Yes.
Cheyenne, right, to Ogden, and then it split, and one leg of the railroad went out to Portland, and the other leg of the railroad went down to LA. And this is the main line as it went from Salt Lake almost to Las Vegas. So
I see.
the area that I model is just 100 miles, 150 miles railroad north of Las Vegas.
So when you say you model it, what does that entail?
Well, right now it honestly doesn't entail much because I don't have a layout. But I like the people who buy our products, so many of them anyway, dream of having.
You have a dream.
I have a dream. So that layout was started when I lived in Utah, and part of the way that we funded Arrowhead and got it started was we sold our house, and we took all the money from the sale of our house and we put it into the company.
I
And
call
so-
that all in.
Yeah, we were all in.
Wow.
So in that
Impressive.
home, I had space for a layout, and I was in the early phases, but actively building a layout. We haven't got back to that same place here.
Well,
So,
did any of it, come with you?
yeah.
Okay.
Some buildings did. Would you like me to show you?
You have one right there? Sure.
Well, it's a step away. You'll see me disappear for just a few seconds, but it'll be
This is
worthwhile.
great video, Blaine. Let's do it.
Okay, one moment.
While Blaine steps away, I guess I will talk a little bit about what's going on with my own layout. Oh, no, he's back. Oh, geez, he's back much faster than I thought. Yeah, I can see why you brought that with you.
So this is a true scale model of the depot
It's gorgeous.
in Caliente. And so the Union Pacific had a number of 5 mission style depots along the line. And what motivated that for the Union Pacific is they were from Barstow, down Cajon. They were competing with the Santa Fe, in some cases on Santa Fe track.
You're
Santa Fe
saying
had-
this was in Caliente, California?
Caliente, Nevada.
Oh, Nevada. Okay. Because I was going to say, I'm very familiar with Caliente, California, and I can't imagine something like that being there.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you might tell, I don't know how good the lighting is, but
Pretty good, actually.
the building is kind of a mint green, a really soft mint green.
Oh, yeah.
So that was the actual color of the station into the 70s.
What's it made out of?
It's a wood frame structure covered in plaster.
Wow.
Oh, wait, the model or the prototype?
The model.
Oh, the model is also a wood frame structure
Okay.
covered in plaster. But yeah, so one of the distinguishing features is that you have these beautiful mission style stations, but they're in like the smallest of towns. I mean, I don't remember off the top of my head the population of Caliente, but it can't be more than 1,000.
I mean, that's gigantic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is it a complete, total, utter scratch build?
Yes.
So you made the molds, cast. Wow.
Well, we didn't injection mold this. It was scratch built from wood and assembled in that. Yeah.
Well, maybe I misunderstood. I thought you said the walls were plaster casting.
No.
Oh, okay.
Walls are wood covered in plaster. You can see.
Gotcha. Yep. That does not look like a quick build.
No, it wasn't. I'm going to set it back so I have my hands free. One second.
Sure. I didn't expect to see that as part of our conversation, Blaine. That was a nice surprise.
Yeah. So I mean, there are things that are conducive to this layout that will be built, but
yeah, you're young enough that you'll get it done.
I hope so.
I mean, people ask me how long I've been working on my layout, and I always kind of chuckle at that question, because which layout are we talking about, right? So built a lot of layouts over time, and the present layout is probably about 7 or so, maybe 8 years of effort. But I started building the layout in this house 30 years ago. So it kind of shows you that, I mean, all the efforts over all of that time, for the most part, only produced as a lasting effect bench work. Right. Every last inch of it has been, as my buddy Dave likes to say, layout kaboomed. He would come in with an idea and he'd just describe it to me and then grin heavily and say, layout kaboom. And I think, oh gosh, there's all these man hours going out the window. But most of the time, these ideas he had merit. And I think I decided about 8 years ago, when I became a prototype modeler, when I stopped being proto freelance and figured out what my prototype was going to be. And I had actually basically learned a lot of new techniques and gotten rid of a lot of the, plaster on screen wire kind of stuff from the dark ages. That's when I finally started to feel like I knew what I was doing, and then I could just do it. I didn't have to sort of be R&Ding my way through the whole thing, and finding the prototype helps a lot, because once you get that figured out, I'm sort of modeling a spaghetti bowl. So took me a while just to get my head wrapped around the actual prototype, because it's so complex in that sort of greater Scranton area,
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm having a heck of a time with it. I have to say. I mean, I'm still full-time employed in my own IT consulting business, but the way things are these days, I'm able to sort of manage my day how I want to manage it, and I'm able to, not waste time. So I'm able to be productive in my business and be productive in the layout, and it's a good time.
It's been a while since we've talked about this. I recall you modeled Conrail about 1976-ish.
It's actually 84.
84. Okay.
Yeah.
But I did get the Conrail part right.
When you knew me earlier, I was modeling early 90s Conrail. Okay. And that was, but when I looked at my, at what I wanted to model, and I looked at what was vibrant and had the kind of traffic that was attractive to me and motive power, I can't leave that out. It became obvious that that area was being greatly diminished in the early 90s. And if I would just go back to the early 80s, I could have my cake and eat it too. So I gave up wide nose diesels and ended up being able to include the D&H and a lot of interaction with them. So now I've got the 3 builder thing going, and my main industry at Mahoopany was generating 100 carloads a day. So it was kind of like a big deal on that line. And it's a big deal on my layout too. So there's a lot of reasons I ended up landing on that 1984 timeframe.
Okay. So I reached for a car. You probably saw me do that.
I did, Anya. I'm tantalized as usual.
It's the box is taped shut, which doesn't make for a quick show on a video podcast.
That's okay. Our witty repartee will carry the day until you get that box open, right?
Yeah, maybe.
But this is obviously related to what we're talking about, and I can't even imagine what it
Well,
would
it
be.
is, because some people are surprised to know that CSX acquired a number of railgun cars, some of which they repainted. We did some of those paint schemes, but you're telling me this would be too late for your interest.
That's right. In fact, I had to divest myself from everything CSX and go back to chassis, B&O, C&O labeled things, including locomotives.
Yeah. Yeah. The B&O and the chassis was actually the first railroad that I ever modeled when I was young.
Really?
First thing when I sort of turned the corner towards.
Were you from that area originally?
No, but I mowed lawns as a kid, and I made $3 an hour or $3 a week mowing lawns for my dad. And I inherited some equipment and locomotives from my brother and from my grandpa. And some of those, were Atlas locomotives, which
the yellow box ones
would have taken me, like 3 summers of mowing lawns to be able to afford. And so I took a step back, and rather conveniently, so many of them were Chessie or Baltimore and Ohio or Chesapeake and Ohio. And so it was a matter of economy. I just made sense to go that direction.
Yeah. I mean, if you're as old as I am and you've been doing it as long as I have, I can remember back when Train Miniature came out. You remember them?
Oh yeah.
And when you could buy an Athearn gondola, not quite like yours, for $1.98. And that was a lot of money back then. I used to have to save up for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's all relative, and I think, some people complain about what things cost these days, but I think we're living in a golden age of products. I mean, they're incredible.
I do too. I really do. And part of the reason is in 1985, let's say, when you could buy a $1.99 gondola from Train Miniatures, that was often it. That was as good as it got.
That's right.
You didn't have the option for the higher quality stuff. Today, you have the option for higher quality products if you want to afford them, if you can afford them, right? You still have the option to go back and get the more economical stuff. That door hasn't closed. In a
way, I think in many cases, certainly not all, but in many cases, the higher quality items are actually a much better value in terms of bang for the buck than the so-called entry-level products. Because some of that cost is kind of sunk. So,
Mhm.
I mean, I think, I don't know, when you compare it from a value quotient, I'm really, guys like you and Dave Lelbach and Nick Molo, I mean, you guys are doing amazing stuff.
Thank you.
Blaine, it was
Yeah.
great. It was great talking with you here. And I before we close up, um, I would be remiss if I didn't say, so this covered hopper, when are we going to see this? Do you have any sense of when that might be seeing the light of day, or is it just premature to speculate?
Well, it is premature to speculate. Always when I speculate in sort of impromptu situations like
It's always
this,
wrong.
I feel like I get it wrong, and I feel like I set expectations up and let people down. So we don't try to speculate.
Yep.
I've learned my lessons. Um, that said, it will definitely be early next year.
Oh, okay. So it's not going to be like a whole year away.
No, first quarter next year.
That's exciting.
So
So it's well along.
well along.
Will that be the only thing you think we'll see from you next year, or is there a possibility of something else next year?
Yeah,
Oh,
there's more
well,
coming.
we'll have this conversation again.
Yeah, I'd love to.
All right, Blaine. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. And I think people are going to be very interested in today's scoop.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. It was great to talk to you. Great to catch up.
Same here.
Take care.